Making the first two of what would eventually be the Three Mothers trilogy. He had done Suspiria and he had done Inferno, and many, many years later finally did Mother of Tears, which was the end of that trilogy of films. But when he finished the second of them, he wanted to get out of supernatural horror, because that really wasn't the thing for which he was best known, and the thing for which he is most gifted, I think. He wanted to go back and do another giallo, but he didn't want to do the kind of giallo he was making when he made Bird with the Crystal Plumage or Four Flies on Grey Velvet. He wanted to do something different, something that really reflected what he felt about urban Italy at that time. Something that was very cold and very hard and very cruel in a particularly icy way, rather than in the very hot way that it is in his earlier films. And you can see that reflected in the architecture of Tenebrae. You can see it in the way he treats many of his characters. I mean, it is a film about surfaces, and most of those surfaces are deceptive. Some of them are very pretty, but they're not at all what's underneath.
The improbable in this case, again, like the book, is almost certainly weird, unbelievable, but possible.
Peter Neal is taken totally by surprise when a journalist he's known for 10 years turns on him and says,
Tenebrae is a sexist novel. Why do you despise women so much?
So it's a very charged situation that I think is very directly a comment on the way Argento has often been treated by the press. The horror press has generally been very sympathetic to him, although there are people who aren't wild for his kind of work, but that's a different sort of thing. But the mainstream press has often focused on the violence in his films, specifically what they call misogynistic violence. I don't think Argento is being completely serious when he says, oh, I kill women in my movies, not men, because women are prettier. I don't think that that is a true thought on his part. That's, again, just a way of tweaking people who have asked him that question 1,000 times. Because, you know what, he doesn't hate women. I mean, Argento doesn't hate women. It's not his makeup. Clearly he makes films that are very violent, and the subjects of the violence are frequently women, which, to be honest, reflects a great deal of the real world around it. I mean, women are often the subjects of violence, both by strangers and by their nearest and dearest, by men who get really mad at them, and that's their excuse for beating them over the head with a bat. It's a cultural thing that is a very widespread cultural thing, and it's reflected in a film like Tenebrae. It's reflected in most of Argento's films. The violence there is an outgrowth of the environment that he creates, and it's an environment that he clearly feels reflects a certain thing that was happening in Europe, the way in which Europe was becoming a much more, a set of countries filled with buildings in that international skyscraper, hard-edged, lots of glittering glass style that doesn't necessarily mesh tremendously well, either aesthetically or historically. And that Tenebrae is very much a product of a kind of grief for what was being lost. Argento has said, and I think he's perhaps joking a little bit because he does enjoy pulling people's legs, that this is a film that's supposed to take place in the future. Clearly it's not a future that's very far away. But I think what he's responding to in it is the ways in which Rome was changing, ways in which all of Italy was changing, and a harder, more international style of architecture had taken root in huge portions of these beautiful, beautiful old cities. The building in which Tilda and her girlfriend lived is hideous. It looks like it's poured concrete, poured gray concrete on top of everything else. It looks very crude and very harsh, but at the same time has these enormous windows, which make it a kind of futuristic building, but a futuristic building that isn't as glossy as the future appears to be at a distance. It's quite ugly, and the ugliest things are not actually women having their throats cut, or the things that you would expect would be the ugliest things. It's the very environment that they're part of, even when you're looking at shimmering swimming pools and little stone paths cut into the grass leading up to doors. There's something harsh and artificial about it throughout. I look at Tenebrae now, and if you said, tell me exactly when this movie was made, I'd throw my hands up, and I really couldn't tell you. The costumes don't really tell you. The clothes are just odd. That hobble skirt that Elsa Manny is wearing, the pink hobble skirt that zips down the front, which is just bizarre, is just odd. You look at it and it's like, what time does that represent, really? Is it 1975? Is it 1985? Is it 1995? If you don't know the context of Tenebrae, it's actually hard to pin that down. Some of the costumes that Dario Argento wears, in particular, there's a kind of a hot orange Nehru jacket. I don't know. I don't even know what to make of that. I've seen this film many, many times. I've looked at that outfit many times. And I don't know what to make of it.
Okay, I'll let you go to bed.
In fact, the costumes of Tenebrae could be used to support the notion that this is a film that's taking place slightly in the future. And fortunately, people aren't wearing plastic jumpsuits. But they really don't look of the time in which it was made, and they don't really look of any other time as well.
I mean, if you make a quick movement, won't it slip off? Look. That's a miracle.
It makes it a very odd viewing experience and contributes to that feeling of coldness. I mean, I think Tenebrae, no matter how violent, no matter how much the content is designed to have a real visceral impact, is fundamentally a very cold movie. I've never found the violence in Tenebrae as affecting as the violence in some of his other films. Even opera, I think, feels more violent in some ways than Tenebrae does. It's all a facade, which is why I love the shot with the straight razor near the end, when Captain Germani realizes that, oh, it's not real. It looks like it's real, but it's not real. The sexuality in Tenebrae is very much of a piece with that idea that it's about surfaces. There's the girl in the red shoes who's not a girl. There's the cute little girl who winds up being victimized in a particularly horrible way. There is his assistant, who is in fact the most sympathetically portrayed woman in the film. She's the one who's basically competent, she knows her job, she's extremely fond of Peter Neal. She does wind up sleeping with him once and just saying, that's it, this isn't a real thing. We're both stuck in your apartment, there's a psychopathic killer out there fixated on you. This is a moment that has to do with all of the violence swirling around us, essentially. It doesn't have to do with us as people. It's a surface thing, again.
Peter, in the morning, we'll both forget about this, okay? Nothing's happened. Nothing.
Nothing's happened.
I find the score of Tenebrae absolutely spectacular. I've watched that film with people who have said, I don't get this score at all. It's like a disco score or something. It seems to me so inappropriate to a suspense film, a thriller, a violent movie of this kind. The thing that I really love about the soundtrack for Tenebrae is that it's so propulsive. It has this underlying pulse that I think, again, ties into a future that is more brutal. Not just brutal in terms of violence, but visually brutal. Argento is known as a technical virtuoso, and he does love to use the camera to draw the viewer directly into the story. You become a part of it because you wind up following these very long tracking shots, or in Tenebrae, this incredible crane shot that creeps over the surface of a building that's occupied by two women, which is extremely beautiful, but is also very much of a piece with the generally voyeuristic, unsafe kind of atmosphere of that film. Even though it's extremely brightly lit, it's not a film of shadows, even though the buildings are by and large very modern, very sharp-edged, very beautiful in a particular way, that crane shot carries this real feeling of dark menace. It's not because it looks like it's the point of view of somebody who's casing the house, because it's physically utterly impossible for a person to do what that camera's doing. You need a camera mounted on a gigantic Luma crane in order to create that sinuous movement that goes up and around, and pauses at the window, and then it goes down again. It gives this incredible feeling of unease, this incredible feeling of being watched. And even though you as the viewer are not the person who's being watched, it's somebody you are also watching within the film, it creates this feeling that you almost want to look over your shoulder and just see if there's anybody back there. I think there's no question that Luciano Tovoli, who worked with Argento on a number of other films before and after Tenebrae, deserves a great deal of the credit for the look of Tenebrae. It's clearly a cinematographer's eye, a visual artist's eye, that is responsible just for the way certain shots are laid out. Argento is a very meticulous craftsman. He knows what he wants. He knows what blocking he wants. He knows what people should look like. But I think that there is a level of attention to color and to shadow, or although mostly it's the lack of shadow, that comes from a cinematographer, and it comes from Tovoli.
I kill you!
Argento is not really a terrific director of actors. It's not his strength. He's extremely good at staging. He's extremely good at visualizing the way in which people will work within a physical space. But if I were an actor, I don't think I would go to him and ask about my motivations, because I don't think I'd even get a Hitchcock dismissal on that. I think he would just throw his hands up and he just doesn't know. He's not somebody who hates actors. He's not somebody who thinks actors are cattle. He's just somebody whose great strength is not working with actors. And so I think the best performances in his films, and I think Anthony Franciosa's performance as Peter Neal is actually quite a strong performance.
Well, I really appreciate that. That's a real compliment. Thank you.
It looks kind of stiff and artificial at the beginning, but the further you go into the movie, the more you realize that that's not Anthony Franciosa, that's Peter Neal. And that's what he's found to work with in that character. I don't think he got any help from Argento on that. I think that was him. Tenebrae really is an aberration in Argento's career, not because its themes are dissimilar to those of most of his films, and not because it's shot in a way that is worlds different from most of his films. It's not shot in black and white. It's not done in long, long single takes. It's technically, and in terms of film language, not dissimilar to Argento's other films. But the cumulative effect of the details of Tenebrae's look really is unique in Argento's filmography.